Hollow Knight is a game that is known for its open-ended progression, allowing clever and attentive players to sequence break to areas that they aren't meant to reach. If you have some familiarity with the game's speedruns, you might know a few of these skips. Queen's Garden's Acid Skip, the Shade Skip, the Explosion Pogo. They all take advantage of the game's mechanics in unique and creative ways in order to reach high ledges or cross awkward gaps. But even the skips considered to be really hard, such as the right side rafters Vengefly skip or the clawless shade skip, barely scratch the surface here. So, in this final week before Silksong releases, allow me to show you some of Hallownest's most depraved and ridiculous skips, and in doing so, teach you some of the mechanics players can abuse in order to make these possible. Oh, and I should say, I'll be streaming my first playthrough of Silksong both here and on Twitch the second it comes out, so if you want to join me for that, that would be absolutely lovely. I can't wait. And then after the first playthrough comes the speedruns and the challenge runs and everything like that. Oh, it's gonna be so good! In the meantime, subscribe? It would be lovely if you joined us on the next chapter. Okay, let's begin. Okay, how do I contextualize this? Okay, let's say you're here, and you really want to get to this Hallownest seal. And a little goblin ran by and stole all of your abilities. Or maybe you're in early game and you already just did Itemless Balder to get here. I don't know. Anyway, you don't have any abilities. This is a huge pit of acid. How do we get through? The obvious first step is to die. No, really, we're doing a shade skip. You may be familiar with the simpler shade skips. The principle is we pogo the shade in order to get height and reach a ledge that should be off limits. Well, the shade provides a portable source of pogo targets, and will be just what we need to make this work. But how do we get you into there? The shade's AI follows the player once alerted to their presence. First, we aggro the shade, lure it close to us, and then drop into the acid just as it prepares to lunge forward. Once we're hazard respawned at the top, the shade will now have lodged itself under the edge of the bridge. We've now succeeded in getting it below us. These arches have slope hitboxes, which are a little wonky and allow us to swing the shade back and forth in order to get it to pass over to this one. Kinda like holding a magnet through a table. The shade being stuck here is crucial as it allows us to buy ourselves time for the next maneuver. Now we walk to the right while staying as high as possible, keeping the shade moving into the arch instead of around it. While we move, the shade dislodges itself from the spot and travels down and to the right, hovering just above the acid. Convenient for us, there is a similar arched gap underneath the main platform, with just enough space for the shade to fit. While we dunk into the acid to the right, the shade flutters down into this gap. Provided this was done correctly and with good timing, once we hazard respawn and walk back left, the shade will now be below us, in between the arches and the acid. We can once again swing back and forth to get the shade over the final arch, and have it resting on the very edge. Okay, you got all that? Well, that was just the setup. Now comes the insanely hard part. Just pogoing the shade won't get us nearly enough distance, as it dies in 2 hits. What we have to do is much more complex. Instead, we fall down, damage tank off the shade leftwards, do a precise pogo as low and as left as we possibly can, both to extend our airtime, keep the shade low and moving left so the future pogos don't bonk the ceiling, but more importantly, to bait an attack. We can parry the shade's attack, giving us an extra pogo without having to damage it. After the parry, we damage tank leftward again and kill the shade with a final, decisive pogo. Executed perfectly, it gives us just enough distance to barely make it onto the platform. Did you get all that? Okay, now let me play the same clip at full speed. I think you see what I mean. You must really like Hallownest seals to be doing all this. Continuing on the shade skip theme, you all know Queen's Garden's Acid Skip, right? The iconic Crystal Dash skip that allows Hollow Knight speedrunners to enter Queen's Gardens without Isma's Tear or Shade Cloak. Well, what if we didn't have C-Dash either? What if the little goblin stole it again? This is a huge gap with a giant thorn overhang. How in the world is this possible? Astute speedrun viewers might know that it's possible to pogo the shade's fireball projectile. You see, the shade, once aggroed, has about a 1 in 5 chance to mimic one of the player's moves. This will come in very handy for us. By dying in the room and setting the shade here, we can do this. First, we alert the shade and walk back, hoping it'll do the fireball attack right away. As the shade lurches back and floats away to line up its shot, now is the time to move. First, we damage tank the shade for some height and iframes, followed by a dash through it and a pogo. Now, the height management here is really important. If we're too low, the pogo will propel the shade into the acid and kill it. It has to be just low enough that it's basically touching the water, or the rest won't work though. Now we go for it, falling down under the thorn overhang and dashing left. As this happens, the shade performs its cast. Once our dash is complete, we turn around and fireball towards the shade, stalling our fall and pushing us slightly further left. The purpose of this is to give the shade's fireball time to reach and hit us before we dunk into the acid, which we'll use to attain some height. Once the spell hits us, we're knocked back left alongside it. Our ride has arrived, and now we need to catch it. By pogoing the shade's spell projectile, we regain our dash, which we immediately use to follow along the spell, squeezing in a final pogo just a fraction of a second before it crashes into the wall and dissipates. This pogo and the subsequent dash gives us just enough distance to make it safely onto the platform. Okay, now at full speed. Each one of these inputs are so precise. The timing of the shade's fireball needs to be just right so that the spell reaches you right as you finish casting yours. The height can't be too high or low into the tunnel, turn around and cast can't lose any height, and the pogos and dashes need to happen perfectly in order for the spell to not slip away before the second one. Perhaps most importantly, you need to be fearless about the squeeze under the thorns. If you don't get far enough with your dash, the shade's fireball and / or your subsequent pogo is gonna bring you straight up into the thorns rather than out the other end. An absolutely bonkers display of speedrunning technique. Now, unless you really like Hallownest seals, the last two skips have been mostly useless outside of rando settings. Here's an insane skip that's actually useful in a proper Hollow Knight speedrun. Or has been. This is the Empty Hall speedrun. The goal of the run is to reach the Hall of Gods with as few bosses as possible unlocked, the lowest number being 3. In the world's first ever completed run of this category by Iron Rose, there was an insane skip. One so hard that the runner spent about 40 minutes trying it in the run. You see, in this category, we want to enter the Fog Canyon to get to the Howling Wraiths pickup without fighting any bosses. This means that we have to get through this tight gap without any abilities. At this point, your mind may immediately wander to the shade once again, but it's actually not even close to enough by itself. Not even with the damage tanking and the parry pogoing is this remotely possible. The gap between the ceiling and the acid is just so small that you would need 3 perfectly timed pogos without losing any height at all. This completely rules out parry pogoing, because being to the side of the shade means you are in the acid. So, what now? Hey you! Come here. This Aspid Mother is just what we need. We start by dying in the room, which makes the shade spawn right here. Now, we aggro it and dunk into the acid, making it move down with us. Because the hazard respawn is still set at the start of the room, the shade now moves towards us at an angle that makes it lodge itself under the overhang and above the acid. Lucky for us, this gap is just big enough that the shade doesn't die to the acid. Now we engage the Aspid Mother. Our goal is to get her squeezed right here at the entrance. But because of our AI, she won't directly attack us. So we have to lure her into this position, then pogo her twice, beating her down towards the acid, and then jumping up to the platform on the side. Doing this just right gets the Aspid Mother stuck at the entrance of the overhang. The shade, meanwhile, is positioned right here. But this isn't enough. If we tried to cross the pit now with pogos, we would get hit to the left. Instead, we need to utilize the Aspid Mother's second property, the baby aspids. You see, on the current patch of Hollow Knight, there's a trick called an inventory knockback cancel. Basically, this means that if you get hit with your inventory open, the game will close your inventory and you won't take the full damage knockback. In speedruns, this is used to traverse the early areas a little bit faster, without the enemies getting too much in the way. Here, we'll use it to maximize the usefulness of our invincibility frames upon taking damage. By positioning right here with our inventory open, we wait until one of the womblings approaches us and hits us. Because our inventory is open, we neglect taking the knockback and can start moving immediately to the right. We fall towards the giant gap and into the Aspid Mother. The starting position of the knight is calculated so that your invincibility frames should run out right when you're inside the Aspid Mother, which, if done correctly, should make you take knockback to the right instead of the left. This damage knockback gives us just enough distance to barely reach the shade and pogo it twice. If those pogos are perfectly spaced, we kill the shade and soar onto the platform on the other side. Okay, a lot about shade skips. Let's try a different category of skips. This is a Shriek pogo. The Abyss Shriek's hitbox looks like this. And on February 24th, 2023, Hollow Knight's 6th birthday, players found out that this Shriek hitbox extends just enough down and lingers for just long enough that it's barely possible to perform a precise wings input into a pogo, barely lifting the knight high enough that the nail hitbox overlaps with the Shriek. And just like the Shade's spell mimicry, the knight's own attacks are actually pogoable. This allows you to pogo, regain your wings and dash, and because of that, if you have more soul, you can do another Shrogo. Now, this trick is really precise. It's about a 2 to 4 frame window for each one. So doing one, let alone chaining multiple together, is really hard. Essentially though, this trick allows you to get infinite height as long as you have soul. Because lucky enough, the Shrogo actually takes long enough to do that the soul you have in your extra canisters has time to get transported to your main one. This especially being the case if you're dashing in between, which leads to insane skips that look a little bit like this. Have you, for example, wanted to get through the final tunnel in White Palace without Crystal Dash? Do you still happen to have 3 Soul Vessels, Spell Twister, Mark of Pride, Sharp Shadow, Dash Slash, Wings, Shriek, and 3 extra casts for the next room using Grubsong to damage tank on the Thorns? Because the next room also has a giant tunnel? In that case, now you know this is possible. Good luck trying it though! Jokes aside though, it's actually insane what you can do with the Shriek Pogo. Okay, hopefully you've learned a few gimmicks about Hollow Knight skips now. I'm gonna show you one more skip, one that puts together a few of the principles that we've learned today. See if you can keep up. Oh, and the runner who recorded this one, Comma Killer, was playing with a few visual mods. Hopefully it's not too hard to follow. Okay, so the goal of this skip is to get to Shio without Mantis Claw. Wings allow us to pogo and then parry pogo the Shade in order to get across the first ledge. Now we can hang on to this Duranda here. Now we need to time the Shade's fireball with it being as high as possible on the wall. This gives us just enough height to clear the second wall, in which we use 2 fireball skips to land on the next Duranda. The last bit of the trick is a tricky little thorn stand, where the thorn hazard's hitboxes doesn't quite match up with the visual element. You can stand on the very corner of it. And just like that, you've reached Shio without Claw. Nice. Alright, that's gonna be it for today. I hope you learned something and I hope you had fun. I could have featured so many more skips here, but I did need to kind of rush to get this video out before Silksong, which, oh my god, 5 days left. We're so close. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to all the runners whose clips I used in this video, and have a wonderful day. I will see you in 5 days when Silksong releases. Bye-bye.